Facebook. Okay, so welcome everybody to our summer class. I think this is actually the 4th year in a row that I've done a summer class for TBT, which is really interesting and crazy to think about. So just in terms of starting here, I'd love to discuss a little bit why I wanted to focus on Shabbat for a couple weeks. So the past couple of years, and these are old classes, I'm sure they can be dug up in some archive of TBT's Facebook or YouTube. I did a series on great debates in Jewish history. I did a series on great debates or great stories in the Talmud. And then I also did a series on great or the best of Jewish ideas. And I decided this summer to sort of narrow the focus. And instead of picking a very broad topic where each week we would switch topics, to really do something more akin to a deep dive of really spending the next 5 weeks of really trying to dissect all things Shabbat. And I decided this for a couple of reasons that I'll just say at the outset, and then we'll get to some tech study. And of course, you know, this is as conversational as we can possibly have over Zoom. So one, I think the idea of Shabbat and the idea of rest, however we want to quantify it, I think has received a lot of new attention, certainly in the last generation, but really especially in the last year or two, where I think society is at a point right now where we're so plugged in all the time. And in terms of the working world, we're always expected to be on in terms of 24/7, in terms of what's happening in the wider world. We can talk, you know, endlessly about social media and the 24-hour news cycle, and just our society is basically continuously cultivating a mindset where there's always information being thrown at us. And given the reality of the world, there's always new things to learn about the world, both good and bad. There's always things to worry about. And there's always work, however we want to define work, which we'll talk about in future weeks. There's always things to do. And so in terms of this new focus on Shabbat, Shabbat quite literally means rest. Lishbot is to rest. It comes from the Hebrew word lashevet, right? It means to sit down, right? So our tradition basically gives us a framework to dealing with what I think is probably one of the biggest individual issues in modern day society, namely that things are overwhelming. And I think society is set up in a way right now, and there's been a lot of really interesting research about specifically the internet and social media sites and news websites to try to keep us captivated as long as possible. And so quite literally the business model that we've been reading and discovering about in terms of Facebook or YouTube or any type of internet sites we could imagine, their goal is to keep our attention for as long as possible. And so whatever that means, right? If politics is what's going to keep you engaged as much as possible, it's going to send you politics. If it's videos, if it's pictures. And again, I think Shabbat gives us an interesting framework that hopefully we'll discuss over the next couple of weeks, embedded within our tradition to sort of fight against or combat what, again, I think, you know, if it's not clear today, hopefully over the course of the next 5 weeks, it'll be clear that I think this is one of the biggest pathologies in terms of contemporary society, that we never just take a step back and focus on the world as it is, as opposed to what we want the world to be, what we're upset that the world is. And so that's sort of one introduction. The other thing is that Shabbat really, if you had to pick one Jewish ritual or one Jewish activity and really claim that that is the center of Jewish practice, it would definitely be Shabbat, right? Of course, certainly at Temple Beth Tikva, Shabbat is our most commonly attended weekly event, right? We have 2 Shabbat services every week, but really the Jewish calendar writ large revolves around Shabbat. Shabbat's such an important day on the Jewish calendar. And here's where we'll get into some interesting discussions that actually, in terms of how the Talmud defines and codifies Jewish law, Shabbat is actually seen as a binary feature of whether or not somebody is part of a quote unquote Jewish community. And so the Talmud's very clear, and this is some of the more, I don't want to say controversial, but the Talmud likes to have very strong statements, which we'll see soon. The Talmud basically says anyone who keeps Shabbat, and we can discuss what that means to keep Shabbat, but anybody with a Shabbat practice, they are a part of the community, even if they don't do anything else Jewish. But somebody who doesn't have a Shabbat practice, the Talmud says, even if they're super Jew other 6 days a week, the Talmud basically says, well, forget them, they're not part of the community. And so again, just sociologically, our tradition gives so much weight to Shabbat. And again, I want to try to dissect and tease out why that is. The last interesting thing that I'll say, I was looking through, just a lot of sources trying to figure out exactly how I wanted to set this up, is that there's now a current sociological trend, both among the sort of tech Silicon Valley world, but also among other monotheistic religions, to actually introduce a Shabbat practice. And this is something that I find really interesting just in terms of contemporary Western sociology, that the prevalence of, let's say, Christian Shabbat practices, where not just people going to church on Saturday or Sunday, but actually there being a practice where people make sure not to work or make sure to try to be as detached from email and everything like that as much as possible, is becoming increasingly popular both in other religious communities that I think have learned or are currently borrowing from the Jewish tradition in terms of the importance of a practice like this, and then also in communities that we view as purely secular, such as the working world and tech world, with all these ideas of shortening the work week and things like that. So that was sort of a lengthy introduction as to why I wanted to pick Shabbat. Before we go into some sources and really start to tease out some of the fundamental ideas, any initial thoughts or questions or reasons why people are specifically excited to learn about Shabbat? Let's take like 3 to 5 minutes for this section. Just any and all things, why is a deep dive on Shabbat something that excited you here? You're just gonna have to unmute and go. Fred, I think you're muted. There we
go. I'm excited about it because oftentimes in our own household, some of us get involved in things that probably I wish that they weren't involved in throughout the course of the day. And I'm not saying it's Cindy, and I'm not saying it's me, I'm saying it's probably both of us. And sometimes the best way to change habits is to start thinking of new ways to spend that time. So I'd say really when I saw your thing today, because I was like, hey, Daniel's giving a lecture today, it made me think we could spend our Shabbat, I think oftentimes, I think we do a pretty good job, but I think we could still spend it in a better way. And so just thinking about it might force us to spend things in a better way. So, that's why I'm here. I was like, I'm hoping that we could kind of change habit. It forces some habit change.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Fred. And yeah, I think what you're touching on is something that I was gonna save this until the middle / the end, but there's a little bit of an irony of what we're doing here, which I don't want to go unchecked, which is the attempted argument that we'll try to make both today and over the course of the next couple of weeks, is that the only way to truly understand Shabbat is to practice Shabbat. And then, of course, here we are talking about it over Zoom. And so I do want to note that irony, that this is the ultimate goal of this is for people who have a consistent Shabbat practice, whatever that is, for this to hopefully broaden the scope of what we're doing over Shabbat for people who don't, to sort of make a convincing argument to try it. But it's really one of those things that, again, like so many other things, and this I think will come out in the sources today, like so many other things that don't bring immediate physical or monetary gratification, it's oftentimes hard to see that small short-term commitments can make a huge difference in the bird's eye point of view, even though week after week, it oftentimes, just being honest, it sucks. Meaning there's never a good time to basically say, okay, email's off for 24 hours. Okay, work is done for 24 hours. Okay, I'm not cooking for 24 hours. There's always good reasons why that's frustrating. But yet, over the course of years, similar to any practice of writing consistently, going to the gym, meditation, somebody who's involved in that practice sees that all those small commitments, the whole is much greater than the sum of its parts there. So love it, Fred. Let's get 1 or 2 more Shabbat comments here.
I would just add that I lived in Switzerland for a year, and everything closed down Saturday at noon and didn't open up Monday until the morning. No grocery stores. Now there were bars and restaurants, and you know what? At first I was like, you're kidding me. I had lived in New York, Chicago, New York City. It's like everything's open. You can go grocery shopping at 2 a.m. And yet it gives you, after you get used to it, it's like, okay, you get into a pattern and you go, we're shutting down. People are not working. People get to go home and spend time with their family, at least. If they don't, they're not a very religious group, but they just, it's like, no, we're just shutting it down. Shut your mind off. We're just gonna, and I started to realize that's a really good idea, because now with the 24/7, at a certain point, they're like, well, Walmart's open even on Thanksgiving, and they're going to be even open on Christmas Day. And they're, those are Christian things or American things, but come on, can't we shut things off a little bit? And I started to appreciate that. And more, that's what we've tried to do with Shabbat, where don't call me and start to give me something, that I got to think about on Shabbat. And it's just a huge break for everybody. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, Heschel, who wrote one of the most famous books on Shabbat, the Sabbath, sums it up, I think, very well, where he says that Shabbat is a day of intense humility, because it's our basically having to come to terms with the reality that the world will go on just fine without us for 24 hours. And it's a really shocking realization, especially, I'll just speak personally. I'm during the week, I'm basically, if somebody sends me an email, text, or call, I'll always see it and respond within an hour or two. And so you could oftentimes, that can cultivate a mindset where you're like, wow, everything I'm doing, it's so important. What would happen if I detached? And then every week you detach, and then Saturday night or Sunday morning, the world is just fine. And it really is sort of a, in addition to all the personal benefits, I think there is a humbling experience. Marilyn, we're going to say something?
Yes, I have some conflict about Shabbat, in that if it's a day that I can take for my family or for myself, either one. But do I, the things that I might want to do in that day are not necessarily sanctioned by our Torah. So yes, that's my conflict.
Yeah, I love that. And I hope that that'll actually come out in next week's conversation. Like next week, the topic is, I sort of organize this by topic. So today is sort of the wider religious concept of Shabbat, for lack of a better term. I named it, something a little more exciting than that. Next week is all about intentionality. And so really with focus on answering that exact question of, are there any, in terms of a 21st century liberal Jewish community, are there things that are unequivocally permitted or forbidden on Shabbat, or is it about subjective intentionality? And there's probably good reason to think that it's mostly the second, although, within probably some Overton window of reasonableness. It would probably be a tough argument to say that if you work in a bank and you just love that so much, and your idea of rest is to, work for 9 to 5 on Saturday, that might be a harder argument to make. But I think the argument that the liberal Jewish community in the 21st century, or really end of the 20th century, has made, which I actually want to look at, is basically exactly your argument, is saying, let's take a really concrete example. And then I'll wait till next week to go into this, because we can probably get sidetracked and talk for 2 hours about this. For about 1800 years, in the playing of instruments was forbidden on Shabbat. So just in terms of going back historically, in the temple, right, in the Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem, they clearly played instruments on Shabbat, right? If we read through the Psalms, right, all of the Psalms are basically about all the instruments they're playing every day as they're bringing the sacrifice. And it's implied that that includes Shabbat. And so if one imagines what a Shabbat might have looked like 2,000 years ago, it was a bunch of people in a temple with musicians and people singing. And obviously the worship's a little different, right? We're no longer bringing animal sacrifices, right? Probably a good thing, but right, in terms of the actual sounding of the prayer, it's similar. In the 2nd century CE, the rabbis, for a whole variety of reasons that we can discuss, basically forbade the playing of music. And then in the 19th century, the early reform movement basically decided, well, hey, those initial reasons no longer apply. Let's go back to this sort of original music playing festive Shabbat. And so that was exactly the argument. So I really do want to dissect it. Anne, were you going to say something?
Yeah, it's kind of along the same lines. I mean, every Shabbat, we get together on Zoom, which is probably not Zoom, but, we phone in with our grandchildren and we do the candle lighting and so forth. And of course, you're not supposed to be on the phone, but, they're not here and we're not there. So, but then it somehow after that moment, which the kids totally enjoy and everybody eats and everybody likes that. And then I know everybody just goes back to the TV. Whatever it is, the ball game or the news so just figuring out, and it's hard for me because I'd like not to do that, but when everybody in your house is doing that, it's a little complicated. So how to influence the people around you.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
And then Jerry, let's get your comment and then let's go into some sources.
Well, as I've learned more about Judaism, my concept of Shabbat changed from, and I think that especially in my religious education, which was very limited, they never really got to what I've thought of as really the core concept there. And I'm going to relate it a little bit to keeping kosher, kashrut. The real essence of the Sabbath, I think, is that it is a holy time that God created. And the rules, the cessation of work and all this other stuff, we're not there so we cease working, and not there so we daven or we do not or play instruments or whatever. It's because God created this time to be holy, and we are a holy people. And so we observe things because of the holiness of the time. And it's, and while it has practical effects on our life, it's like arguing that the laws of kashrut are for health reasons. No. They may have that effect, but that they're not there for that. And the reason for the rules on Shabbat are really, I think, when you look at them, they're centered on this concept that it's a holy time. And God created a holy day, which is rather abstract, but that's not uncommon for our religion. That's all I have to say.
Need to think about the day. Jim, okay. Well, what happened?
I think Daniel got disconnected.
Oh.
Well, while he's gone, there's one thing I want to say. Daniel got me this book just 2 weeks ago called The Sabbath, which I thought was like kind of perfect. So I've been reading it. I figured doing a class along with the reading from him would be just perfect. And there's one chapter in the beginning that says something like, I forgot who the last speaker was, that really touches upon this, that like some religions have temples or monuments to their like gods, but like we have a day or a time that's dedicated towards it. And that's our monument and our celebration. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought that was a similar point.
Josh, can you say the name again?
Oh, The Sabbath?
The book name.
Yeah, it's called The Sabbath.
Okay, thank you so much.
That's the book that Daniel mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I'm probably going to be drawing a lot.
Read the author.
Abraham Heschel. I can also put in the chat. But I've read like a few chapters so far and it's really good.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Sorry that my internet seemingly has decided to be a little fickle today. So we have, okay, so I'm going to probably pick on some different people to read, but just to get a little bit of a sense of sort of the aura of Shabbat as told through Jewish tradition. Josh, can I pick on you to just read this first line?
Oh yeah, from Lecha Dodi, which a song that we listened to in the class that I took from Daniel. Come, my beloved, to meet the bride. Let us become the Sabbath. Welcome the Sabbath.
Awesome. So this Lecha Dodi poem, which we do every Shabbat at TBT, is currently the cornerstone of the Friday night welcoming Shabbat service. And what we do is something very profound, which is in Kabbalistic literature, the welcoming of Shabbat is equated to a wedding. And I don't want to overstate sort of the value of this. Judaism as a religious tradition gives sort of the highest of value to the idea of weddings, right? Unlike other religious traditions that we know have been sort of equivocal in terms of their view of marriage and their view of sort of interhuman love and relationships, Judaism views as probably one of the most profound things is the sort of unification of couples. And so using this language basically reserves the highest of honors for Shabbat. It also lets us know that what we're doing, and this is, I think, the real trick of Shabbat, what we're doing is not something that should be seen as ordinary. And so one of the things in which I want to discuss today, the second half will end up discussing a lot more practical. The first half, it'll be a little bit more philosophical, is how to actually go about attaining this level of, wow, this Shabbat night, let's say Friday at 6 p.m. when we start services, or Friday at sundown when Shabbat traditionally starts, I am entering into something special. And it's not, oh yeah, another day on the calendar turned. Before we go there, and Jerry, I'm going to pick on you to read because you had the comment about wanting to get to the root of what Shabbat is really about instead of, I forgot how you classified the other side. Can you read the next source? And then I'll explain why I wanted this to be read, even if this makes seemingly no sense at the moment.
Talmud Shabbat 73a. The main categories of prohibited labor are 39. Seeding, plowing, harvesting, bundling, threshing, winnowing, selecting, grinding, sifting, kneading, and baking, shearing wool, bleaching it, carding it, dyeing it, spinning, warping, setting up 2 loops, weaving 2 threads, undoing 2 threads, tying, untying, sewing 2 stitches, and tearing in order to sew 2 stitches, trapping a deer, slaughtering it, skinning it, salting it, tanning its hide, scraping it, and cutting it, writing 2 letters and erasing in order to write 2 letters, building and destroying, extinguishing and kindling, hitting with a hammer, transporting from one domain to another. These are the main categories of labor, 40 minus 1.
Awesome. Thank you, Jerry. 40 minus 1 is just rabbinic shorthand for 39. So what's happening here, right? So this is the most important Jewish legal source for Shabbat. So anybody who, as Jerry said, and I'm going to unshare my screen just so we can see each other here. Anybody who levies the complaint, which Jerry levied, which I think is a very valid complaint, which is whenever we're talking about Shabbat, it seems like we're not talking about the thing itself. We're talking about contemporary or sociological or psychological benefits of Shabbat, but that's not the root of the crux of the religious issue. So what is this source saying? If you had to summarize this source, what is the ethos of what the Talmud is trying to accomplish by forbidding all these things on Shabbat?
Don't do any work.
Okay, so don't do any work. Other thoughts?
Go ahead. Nothing new.
I was just thinking that change your patterns. You've got to do all these things for 6 days. If you just keep going, then what's the difference between you or the ox that pulls the yoke? There's not. You know, it's like you need to differentiate. Even you're trying to differentiate the ox, he's not allowed to pull the yoke, which is really extreme, but it's and very amazing. But, you know, you need to just change it, you know, and do something different.
Awesome. So basically trying to have a hard stop, for lack of a better word, on the normal things. I mean, I know now probably most of us aren't hunting and skinning deers, but in terms of, right, if we imagine this in a contemporary setting of just 39 categories of labor that the average person involved in making society go round is involved in on a daily basis, hard stop. Susan, what were you gonna say?
Well, I was going to say what came to mind first before Cindy spoke was that it's not making changes permanent. I mean, the sewing or tearing, which there is that underlying concept that on Shabbat you don't, strictly halachically, you don't do something permanently, you don't change, which then also accentuates that it's set aside from the first 6 days. And to fit in with Jerry's, that the seventh day is holy, that's our chance to also be, in a sense, godlike, to rest.
Yes, I love it. So Shabbat, what this amounts to, and I love how you phrased it like that, Susan, what this basically amounts to is the idea that Shabbat is a lot more fundamentally about what we're not doing than it is about what we're doing. And I think that's a really interesting framework in terms of when we think about religious creativity and everything like that, in terms of what are we actually trying to accomplish on Shabbat, it's a lot more what are we trying to not do. And we'll read the creation story in a second, because no conversation about Shabbat is, you know, complete without an understanding of where it comes from in the biblical narrative of creation. But even before that, what it amounts to is basically a pulling back from the natural world. All of these categories of labor, which in some sense and in some way, irredeemably or unchangeably, or whatever word we want to use, they represent some fundamental change to the natural world, right? Whether we think about anything involved in hunting or anything involved in building or anything we involved in tailoring and things like that. These are things that once they're done in the world, they're a part of the world. And Shabbat is a day where we are attempting, through a lot of the ideas that hopefully we'll be discussing soon, to actually pull back from the natural world and to understand, and this is, I think, the important jump, that there's more to the world than just nature. And this is the secret in some sense, and we'll get to the sources in a minute, but this is the secret of Shabbat in terms of Jewish tradition, is that we acknowledge a natural world, right? Judaism is very much in favor of our interaction with the natural world. We're not an ascetic tradition that suggests, hey, it would be a great idea to fast for multiple days at a time, or it would be a great idea to move to the mountains or move to a cave and, you know, cut off contact with people, right? That's never been a Jewish idea. But Shabbat is one day a week where we basically have to get, for lack of a better term, slapped on the face to say, okay, we've engaged with the natural world, right? We've made it through one natural cycle, right? If we think of just even what the number 7 conceptualizes, and this is more of a Kabbalistic idea, but I think it's sort of born out from this idea of 7 all throughout the Torah and all throughout Tanakh, right? There's 6 principal directions in the world, right? If we think about up, down, forward, backwards, right, left, right? So 6 very much in Judaism represents a natural cycle. And the whole point of Shabbat is that it's something that's metaphysical or non-physical or above nature, which is exactly what Shabbat is sort of demanding of us, right? It's demanding that there's a time of a week where we realize that what's important in life goes beyond any physical change or anything we can build or anything we can destroy. That there's in some way, and again, we'll go through some of these sources and we'll discuss some practical ways how, but in some way our worth is not our physical or material output. And this is an idea that I think throughout all of human history, right? This was an idea that was crucial Because if we just think about how the ancient world functions, and I'll say this, then we'll go back to the sources for a minute. In the ancient world, much like the modern world, right, it was things that were worshipped, right? If we think of this in terms of the ancient world, in terms of idolatry, it was quite literally a worshiping of things. Even in the contemporary world, right, there's oftentimes a worship of wealth and a worship of material things. And Shabbat, again, comes to tell us that in this new religion of ancient Judaism, right, with our new creation story, it's not about the worshiping of things, right? It's not about the worshiping of any material or any monetary changes or advances we can make in society. That oftentimes what's most important in the world are actually things that are non-physically tangible. And this is something that, again, it's really intuitive when we think of it in terms of our own lives, right? I remember every time something annoying happens and I'm talking about it with my mom, she always asks, is this a problem that can be solved with money? Which is a really interesting way of thinking about the world, right? Obviously, right, money is crucial and there are a lot of problems that you need money to solve. But the problems that can't be solved with money, right, those are the really bad problems, right? Or the things that don't have material worth, such as relationships or love or commitment to ideas, right? Those are things that, again, no amount of money or resources is going to be able to make up for lack there. So I want to go back to the sources for 1 second and kind of walk through how I think the sources bear out a little bit of this wider philosophic story. Susan, can I ask you to read the creation story here?
Okay. I just, wait, and the heaven and earth, am I
Yep.
finished? And all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work which he had made. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, Kadesh, because that in it he rested from his work which God in creating had made.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. I always like to note this does not translate well. There isn't really any good. It's funny because this is a total side tangent, but I think hopefully an interesting one, right? Whenever we're talking about translations, really of any work, but specifically in the Torah, there's two different philosophies of translation. One, and they both have their downsides. One is, let's try to translate as literally and verbatim as possible, which ends up sounding like this, because the way that Hebrew translates, Hebrew uses a lot of double verbiage and, interesting grammar. Or there's, let's try to give it a translation based off of what it means, which of course then just becomes the commentary of whoever was translating it. And so there's no really good, nobody's ever really cracked the code yet of how to write a perfect translation. But thank you, Susan, for reading this. So this is the prototypical religious, mythical, however we want to describe it, story of how Shabbat ends up getting introduced. And much like we were talking about before, Shabbat is described as the end or the culmination of creation, that God had 6 days to basically create everything in the physical world. And then finally, on the seventh day, God spent one more day in this sort of creation bubble before the world was actually complete. And there's a really interesting rabbinic commentary, right? A lot of rabbinic commentary just in terms of rabbinic methodology, right? The rabbis thrive whenever there's contradiction within the text of the Torah. And so this is one of the most famous statements of Rashi, the 12th century or the 11th century French rabbi, where he points out that there's an obvious contradiction here in this source, which is, on the seventh day, God finished his work, but he also rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. So the question that the rabbis ask is, well, which is it? Did he finish his work on the seventh day, or did he rest on the seventh day? Because if I told you that I finished my work on Monday, that makes it seem like I was not resting on Monday, right? There was still work to be done. And the rabbis sort of endlessly, right, for those familiar with rabbinic literature, the rabbis go back and forth. There's one statement in the Talmud that says, well, God doesn't experience time the same way, me and Susan experience time, where it's very concrete. God can basically, the famous philosophic paradox of, can God create a rock that God can't move? So they basically say, well, God was doing that, right? He was simultaneously resting and creating at the same time, right? But those who are less paradoxically inclined, what the Midrash, which is the rabbinic literature quoted by Rashi, says that God's work wasn't actually finished on the sixth day. And so the obvious question the rabbis ask is, well, what still needed to be created, right? The 6 days of creation encompassed basically everything. And what Rashi answers is that this idea of rest still needed to be created, which I think is really, really profound in terms of just the philosophy of rest and the philosophy of Shabbat and what we're trying to accomplish here. Because I think for probably the average person, the word rest can seem like this is just the not doing of stuff. And certainly one way to view Shabbat, right, in terms of what Jerry read before, the 39 categories of things we can't do, right? One way to view rest is simply the cessation of activity, right? So if one gets home at the end of the day from work or from whatever they were doing and they sit on the couch and watch TV, right? They're certainly resting from something. But what it seems like the Torah is teaching here is that real rest or true Shabbat is something that actually needs to be created for ourselves. And that it's not something that one can simply say, okay, I've stopped doing everything, therefore, I'm ready to accept the rest. That there actually needs to be some sort of seeking on our part and some sort of creating or cultivating what that means to actually experience Shabbat. And so we get sort of into just, let's do a couple more sources here, and then we can sort of hash this out in conversation. There's a couple sources that I wanted to basically, that I wanted to use as fodder for a wider conversation, because really I don't want this to be just about text study, but I wanted to base our conversation in the texts. And this is how the Talmud and rabbinic sources describe how we're supposed to begin to actually seek this partition from nature. Because it turns out it's something that's very difficult. Fred, were you going to say something?
We were talking about rest, so I'm like, well, let me look up what the definition of rest is. And I just want to throw this one out here because I don't know if this in any way is going to be the direction you're going to want to go, but it says this. This is what the definition of rest is on American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language, 5th edition. The part that is left over after something has been removed, the remainder, okay? Which I think, as I sit and think about that, we've removed all those 39 things, which you could even add then starting IVs and all the things that I would do, or what, obviously they tried to give a coherent list of things that people do, which is probably a greater thing now than what we once did. And when I read that list, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking it has to do with, well, they tried to list as many work-related items as they could. And it's like, so what's left over after that? Okay, you take all of that and that's been removed. Now what do you have?
What's
okay,
the rest?
What's the rest? Okay, that is the rest. Okay, are we talking about that? Are we talking about the remainder, which, because I don't know the Hebrew word there that they use for rest. Are they talking about resting on a couch? No, I don't think so. Is it the rest? What is that Hebrew word, Daniel? And I really wanted you to look at the Hebrew word and give me some concept of where they're coming from.
Fred, you are in the right place, because the word for rest in Hebrew is Shabbat. So this is the whole point. I mean, I say that a little bit in jest, but that's really the question is Shabbat in Jewish tradition is probably doesn't translate well to rest, which is why, it's funny because in the Jewish community, especially in America, we oftentimes translate everything, right? In terms of being, accessible for people who don't speak Hebrew, right? I don't know of any Jewish community that translates Shabbat. And even in the Christian world, right, they call it Sabbath, right? It's not, sometimes we call it day of rest, but like, I would almost never, I can't imagine any temple saying we're going to have our day of rest services now, right? It's always Shabbat services, because there is, I think, this problem of translation of the term Shabbat encompasses so much more than any one, right? It's sort of irreducible in some way, because Shabbat is not just, and then I see there's a couple of people with their hands up. Shabbat is not just the cessation of engaging with the material and physical world. It's also, at the same time, the acknowledgement that there's more in the universe than just the physical world, which is why it becomes such an important cornerstone of Jewish practice. Sure, communally, but theologically, Shabbat's the most important day on the Jewish calendar. Because
And that's
Shabbat,
six classes about it, huh? It's going to take 6 classes to figure it all out.
exactly. Susan, I see you were going to say something, and then Ethan. Susan, I think you were on mute.
Yes, and I was saying, sorry. Back in the days when I was trying to learn biblical Hebrew, I somehow translated Shabbat Vayinafash as rested and refreshed his soul. So, I mean, which is an expansion then of to me, the concept of rest. When we think of it as a refreshing activity, one that gives us then peace but maybe more energy, which is what I also think that I didn't say, that if one does observe Shabbat in a restful way, I found years ago in another life that I had more energy to do things the rest of the week, or that I could accomplish on Sunday what would have taken me Saturday and Sunday to accomplish prior to observing Shabbat.
Yeah, in terms of the Hebrew there, you're totally right. Shabbat, I mean, Vayinafash, the root of the word is nefesh, which quite literally just means a breath, right? So if you want to read this hyper literally, which some scholars want to, you can say that it was God kind of, like actually taking a break at the end of a hard day's work. For somebody who is less interested in sort of that level of biblical literalism, right? Nefesh has also come to mean a soul, right? Or a non-physical dimension of somebody, right? The first time nefesh is used is in the God creating of Adam, and it says he blew into him soul, and uses that same word. And so again, right, it goes back to this foundational theological idea that the practicing or acknowledgement of Shabbat is an acknowledgement that there is more to the world than just materialism, whether that be in a grand theological sense, or whether that be in a strict, life will go on without you engaging with the material world sense. But Shabbat quite literally is created to be a vanguard against an over-obsession with the physical world and with materialism. Ethan, I see you were going to say something.
Yeah, it was something that someone said a minute or two ago. So going back to like the Genesis 2 text, and this idea that you can't just leisurely go into Shabbat, but it's a rest that you have to opt into. I thought it was a really interesting way, I'm talking about the sanctification of Shabbat, talking about the rituals of Kiddush and then Havdalah, where you have the 2 consumptions of wine that kind of bookend this period of rest, and just pointing out that this is like a special time that you have to work to set aside the rest time. Like you can't just go into it, but you have to go out of your way to do it. And so that was a really cool thing that this text kind of points out.
Yeah, 100%. And this is actually, by the way, this is a source for Kiddush, right? It says, right, if you just read in the Hebrew, and then I'll do it in the English, Vayvarech Elohim et Yom HaShvi'i, right? God blessed the seventh day, Vayikadesh Oto, right? Here it translates to hallowed, right? But the word Kadesh could also mean to sanctify, to make holy, to separate, right? This is actually the source of, we are quite literally, what we're trying to do from a ritualistic perspective is quite literally imitate God here, right? God Vayikadesh, all right, I'll fuse Hebrew and English grammar, right? God made the seventh day Kadesh. And so we, in our welcoming of Shabbat, try to do that also. And we try to make Kiddush, which is quite literally to make something holy or to separate. Anne, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just thinking the story where God withdraws from the world. When you were taking the breath, I was thinking about that, to leave us space in the world. So I'm thinking Shabbat is where we take that breath and make space for God. God made space for humans to exist, and then we make space on that day for God.
Yeah, I actually really love that. Yeah, and I think that fits in really well with the sort of the need to purposely separate oneself from the physical world in order to make room for space, and in the most general of senses, basically allow us to appreciate the fact that there's more to the world than just what's going on in the physical world. So I really love that. Let's do just a couple more sources, and then we can. I didn't actually give an end time to this class, so we can. I'm happy to hang out and for as long as people want to keep talking about Shabbat. So just to cover the bases, just to show that Jewish texts do sort of speak to a lot of these things. In terms of what Ethan was saying, right? This is quite literally the rabbis make the exact same connection that Ethan did, which is, right, this is the source for Kiddush in the Talmud, where the rabbis say, well, it says in the 10 Commandments, right, we're supposed to remember the day of Shabbat and sanctify it. And then the 10 Commandments goes on and says, because God created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh he rested. And so it says, well, now we have to go through that through the recitation of Kiddush. I want to switch over to some of, I think, the more practical things in which Jewish tradition gives us that I think has, interestingly enough, trickled down through tradition. And I think we'll be able to see glimpses of a lot of these sources in our own communal Shabbat practice. So let's do this next source, the Talmud Shabbat. Does anybody want to volunteer to read?
I can read.
I'll go for it.
Rabbi Hanina would wrap himself in his garment and stand at nightfall on Shabbat Eve and say, come, and we will go out to greet the Shabbat, the queen. Rabbi Yanai put on his garment on Shabbat Eve and said, enter, O bride, enter, O bride. Rabbi Abahu would sit and fan the fire, cooking the food for Shabbat. Rav Safra would roast the head of an animal to prepare it for Shabbat. Rava salted a fish in deference to Shabbat. Rav Huna kindled lamps in deference to Shabbat. Rav Papa spun the wicks for the Shabbat lamp. Rav Hista cut the beets in preparation for Shabbat. Rabbi Yav Yosef cut wood. Rabbi Zera prepared thin sticks for kindling. Rav Nacham Bar Yitzhak would load objects on his shoulder and enter, load objects on his shoulder and exit.
Perfect. So this is, I think, supposed to be a little, I don't want to say comical, but I think it's supposed to paint the picture of, if you imagine, right, each of these rabbis were basically the heads of their various academies, right? So you can imagine, the equivalent of, I'm trying to think of a character in society that's universally respected now, but it's very hard to do. So, but if you can imagine within internally in a community, the person who's sort of the most widely respected, scholarly person, right, who on a normal day, right, without giving any moral claim to what I'm about to say, but on a normal day, it would be very rare to sort of see them, let's say, cutting the beets for dinner or going out into the forest collecting sticks, right? The Talmud tells a story of these rabbis and sages were very careful to be a part of the preparation of Shabbat, very much in this idea where if you just sit back and expect something to happen in terms of some magical, experience of the second sundown hits on Friday, you're not going to be jolted into some magical experience. But just like what we know about so many other things that are not physical in nature, right? You actually have to commit to it before you gain any benefit from it, right? And that's true for everything. That's true for relationships with religion or God. That's true for relationships with other people. That's true for commitments to ideals, right? Which is why, again, this is such a tricky thing, because we are hardwired and nature is hardwired to basically get us the quickest materialistic gratification as possible, right? If one looks in the, right, there's a lot of sort of Hasidic philosophy that goes down this path. And I was thinking of bringing a source from the Tanya, which is sort of one of the major books of Hasidic philosophy, but instead I'll just sort of speak it out, where human beings sit at this sort of crossroad between being a part of animals and being a part of God, right? I mean, just in terms of going back to the biblical story, right? God creates humans in his image, and then also humans are created presumably right along the array of animals. And so there's constantly these dual force, which I think anybody who's lived life also experiences, right? Humans can at times act very animalistic, and humans can at times act very idealistic. And Shabbat is basically a one day a week that's trying to put all of the chips in the idealistic category, right? It's one day a week that we can disconnect from our baseline evolutionary or naturalistic tendencies, and we actually could accomplish something more, but that requires something on our part also, right? These two sources, just before we move on here, this is the Talmudic source for the entirety of the Kabbalat Shabbat prayer that we do Friday night. And so it used to be that the rabbis would actually, right, we don't do this anymore, it would be, I think, a little difficult for a variety of reasons, but they would actually, some of them would go outside and quite literally imagine that they're greeting the Shabbat as being personified, right? And a lot of the songs we sing Friday night, right? Next time we're at a Friday night service, right? It's worth it to just read the English translation. But unlike almost all Jewish prayers, one of the things that we do Friday night is we actually sing songs to Shabbat, right? It's a very strange thing that we do, because for somebody that's never heard of Shabbat before and just came to a Friday night service and was reading the prayers in English, they might mistake that we're actually praying to an entity called Shabbat, which of course is not the Jewish intention. But a lot of our prayers are quite literally trying to conceptualize Shabbat metaphorically in a person, because we understand, I think, intuitively what it means to sacrifice and to connect and to build long-term relationships with a person. It's a lot harder to build a long-term relationship and connect to an abstract idea such as a 24 or 25-hour period of time. Let's do one or two more sources, and then I'll conclude and then share my screen, and then I can kind of introduce what we have next. Let's see what we want to do. Okay.
Can I ask a question about that text?
Yeah, go for it. Of course.
Do you know if there's any kind of commentary about what that garment would have been that Rabbi and I would have put on? Like, I know we're saying it might be a little metaphorical, but out of curiosity, like, what could they? Are they probably alluding to like a talit or something, or?
Yeah, it's a good question. What they're probably alluding to is sort of like a nice garment, right? Within this, right? The Talmud goes on for many pages about, discussing the specifics, and it talks about how on Shabbat one should try to dress in a way that's sort of, I don't want to say better, but, dress in a higher standard than they would during the rest of the week. Again, not because, and I think getting back to something that I think Marilyn said 30 minutes ago, right? There's always this sort of dual way to view a legal tradition such as Judaism, right? Jews love law, right? In terms of, right, our books are obsessed with rabbis debating the aspects of law. And there's always two ways to view that. One is that there's something objective, and there's something objectively important within each and every law, and each and every mitzvah, each and everything in the Torah is important for its own sake. Or there's another philosophic view, and this was a big debate among medieval Jewish philosophers, so this isn't something that somebody cooked up in the 1950s, right? There's another Jewish philosophic position that says that Jewish law is only important because it leads to an end, right? And so Jewish law is important, but only as a means to an end. And the obvious practical difference between those two things is what happens if a Jewish law is no longer fulfilling its purpose, right? This is a huge debate, right? Most debates in the modern Jewish community between different types of Jewish practices can probably be drilled down to that medieval Jewish debate, which is there something objective about each and every law, or are the laws just trying to funnel us into a heightened awareness of the world and more spiritual connection with God and a better interpersonal relationships? In terms of a lot of things on Shabbat, both in terms of the laws of Shabbat and in terms of the sort of positive commandments about Shabbat in terms of you're supposed to eat certain foods, wear certain things, do certain prayers. These are all just scaffoldings to attempt to get us to that next level of what Shabbat really is, right? Like I remember there was a funny conversation. This is just an interesting tangent, right? There's a famous statement in the Talmud that says that on Jewish holidays, you're supposed to be happy, right? The Torah says, "V'samachta b'chagecha," right? You should be happy in your holidays. And so the rabbis famously say, okay, well, how do we ensure that people in the community are happy? And so they give a very, funny answer, right? They say, well, we need to have meat and wine, right? So basically have a barbecue, right? Everybody loves barbecues. And so I remember when I was in yeshiva, there's always that one person that raises their hand and says, but what if I'm a vegetarian? Or what if I don't like meat? And it's like, it's this exact point. It's when the Talmud says, wearing a certain garment or cuts a certain fish, right? If you hate fish, right, it would be a hard pressed argument to say like, no, these laws are rigid and unmovable, right? Much more in terms of the wider intentionality of the law. That said, and this is the last thing I'll say in this tangent, there is a serious slippery slope in terms of once one says, well, if the laws are just a means to an end, why not just cut forward to that end? Right? It turns out that's very hard to do. And in terms of cultivating that end, a certain philosophic goal, whether that goal be right here in Shabbat, we're talking about an appreciation of Shabbat, there's only so many corners one could cut before basically the whole thing falls apart. And this is a very personal question. I think it's also a Jewish sociological question, right? We can discuss that maybe next week or the week after. But there's this fine-tuned balance, which I think is a very important question in terms of individual practice of Shabbat, is what is the proper balance between feeling bound by traditional Jewish law and two, actually gaining what Shabbat is supposed to be giving me, while acknowledging erring too far on one side might actually destroy the whole ecosystem. So let's do one or two more sources, and then we can wrap this up and open it up for more conversation. Somebody who hasn't spoken or read yet, can you read this Mishnah Torah? Maddie, can I pick on you to read?
Yes. Yeah, let me make it bigger one second. One should spread his Sabbath table on Friday, thank you, even if he requires no more than an olive's bulk of food. So too, he should set his table at the end of the Sabbath, even if he requires only a minute amount of food, in order to honor the Sabbath both at its entrance and departure. One should also set the house in order on Friday before sunset in honor of the Sabbath. A lamp should be lit, a table spread, and a bed properly arranged. All these are marks of respect for the Sabbath. Even a person of high rank, who does not, as a rule, buy things at the market or engage in household chores, should himself perform what is necessary for the Sabbath, for this is his way of showing respect. Some of the ancient sages used to chop wood for the cooking. Others used to cook or salt meat or twine wicks or light lamps. Others used to go out and buy food and drinks for the Sabbath, although none of them would usually do such things on weekdays. The more anyone honors the Sabbath in this manner, the more praise he deserves.
Awesome. Thank you, Maddie. And just as in terms of methodology, the Talmud, this is actually a medieval Jewish text written by Maimonides, the Rambam. They a lot of times use he, right? I sometimes go through and translate just to be a more inclusive male and female or gender neutral phrase. I didn't go through this one. There was a lot of he's here, but this equally applies to everybody here. But again, this is sort of just a continuation off of that last idea of the idea that there's something we're quite literally trying to jump shock people into realizing that what we're about to encounter is going to be a different experience. And we haven't even talked to them, right? This is all pre-Shabbat right now, right? We're not even talking about Shabbat yet, but there has to be some sort of buildup for this day of Shabbat and some sort of acknowledgement that you are partners in creation of this day with God, right? It's something we intuitively believe about the material world, by the way, right? Jewish tradition, in terms of the way that we relate to the physical world, is there's a longstanding Jewish notion that we are partners with God in creation, right? That God creates the world in 6 days, but quite famously, there's a lot left undone. And that during the 6 days of the week, humans have to partner with God to do, right? Some people call it tikkun olam, some people call it, right? There's all sorts of names that our tradition gives to the fact that we have to be builders and perfecters into a world that's at times broken, right? The same ideas apply to Shabbat also, that Shabbat is a time where we're also imitating God, but imitating God in the creation of rest. And that's what I wanted to get to, this source that hopefully now, right, a lot of times Talmudic or Jewish legal sources sound very shocking when presented in a vacuum. But I think with certain, facts and philosophies in place, right? The Talmud and Maimonides, who famously just encoded the legal precepts of the Talmud into a book called the Mishnah Torah, equates somebody who publicly desecrates Shabbat to an idolater. And for anybody who's studied any Jewish texts, right, specifically the Tanakh, Judaism does not look fondly upon idolaters, right? If you had to summarize probably one of the most often repeated things in the Tanakh, it's do not worship idols, right? And we can have a whole conversation, which we talked about a little bit before, about why idolatry is so bad. But here our tradition equates Shabbat to idolatry. And I think without going into a full-fledged conversation about idolatry, I think here, and I'd love to hear other thoughts, that it's specifically the aspect of idolatry that our tradition hates so much is once we acknowledge that any material things have divine value, that automatically introduces into the world some sort of hierarchy, right? Not just hierarchy in terms of I'm your supervisor at work, but hierarchy in terms of I am more important than you, right? Because if an object has more value than another object, and that object happens to look a lot more like, let's say, Ethan, then that object looks like me, well, maybe Ethan's more important. And once Ethan's more important, maybe Ethan has no ethical need or imperatives towards me, who's obviously lower, right? And we know both from Jewish tradition, right, the Torah and the Passover story, and also just from what we know about history and the ancient world, that humans claim to be God all the time, right? If you were the Pharaoh, or you were the king of Assyria, or you were the king of Babylonia, you weren't just a political leader, you were divine. And once you're divine, right, all morals go out the window, because if I'm divine and you're not, what moral precepts do I have towards you? And this all goes back to this idea of the worshiping of things, right? Once we allow things to have ultimate value, I see somebody is, there we go. Once we allow things to have ultimate value, right, it creates a very slippery slope into a system where people are taken advantage of. And I think Shabbat is coming here to basically teach the same thing in a theological and philosophical sense, right? This idea that we view the natural world as important and indispensable, and we want to be a part of it. But there's a need to understand that there's more to the world than just material and physicality, which is why, from the point of view of our tradition, there's actually no theological difference between one who does not acknowledge the fact that there are times where we're not supposed to be obsessed with the physical and idolatry. And this then leads into just, this will be the last source that we do. And then there's one more source on the bottom for anybody that's curious, but this will be the last one we do together. Who has not read it all yet? Amanda, would you like to read? Go for it.
Yeah. There is no need to be overly concerned with Jewish law in order to know the value of Shabbat. Whoever feels in their heart a true connection with the life of the Jewish nation in all generations cannot in any way imagine a reality for the people of Israel without Shabbat. One could say without exaggeration that more than Israel has kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept Israel. And if it hadn't returned to them, their souls, and renewed the lives of their spirit each week, all the sufferings of the days of creation would drag us farther and farther downward until they would eventually descend to the bottom floor of materialism and ethical and intellectual baseness.
Thank you so much, Amanda. So just quick biographical note, Ahad Ha'am was the founder of cultural Zionism. So unlike Theodor Herzl, who was a political Zionist, Theodor Herzl wanted a state of Israel because in his view, anti-Semitism was getting so bad that unless Jews were in control of their own government and military, Judaism would simply physically die out. Ahad Ha'am was also a Zionist, but for a cultural or spiritual reason, right? He thought that Judaism was getting so watered down and Jews and Judaism was assimilating so quickly that if we didn't have a cultural center of Judaism, Judaism would die out, not the Jewish people, right? So it's a really interesting debate that Ahad Ha'am and Theodor Herzl had. But this is probably one of the most famous statements about Shabbat, where he says, more than Shabbat has kept the Jews, more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. And what's interesting is he notes also that Shabbat is this vanguard against getting sucked into the worst of the physical world. Because again, oftentimes, and and I said we're not going to do the last source, but we'll do it real quick because I think it illustrates this point quite nicely. But oftentimes it's hard to judge things ethically in real time. And one of the things that Shabbat, again, forces communities to do or forces individuals to do is pause. And when you pause, it turns out you reflect. And without reflection, right, you have no idea if what you were doing the other 5 or 6 days a week was ethical or not. And so in terms of the literature on Shabbat, right, somebody said this before, I think maybe Sydney, that on Shabbat, we don't just make you stop, right? It's you and your workers and your animals, right? In a contemporary world, we might say, right, it's Siri and Alexa, right? All of our apps, right? But it's only once that's paused, right? It's only once everything that is working with and for you is paused that there's actually a time to think about, well, hey, those workers or those animals or whatever you're involved in, is that good? Is that bad, right? Because you've taken a moment to actually step back from that day in and day out grind. There's a really great book. This is my second Shabbat recommendation book. Maybe at the end of this, I'll send out a whole list of materials about Shabbat, written by Judith Sholevitz. I'm probably butchering the name, Sholevitz, where she wrote a book about Shabbat and then proceeded to write articles in basically all the major magazines in the early 2000s about how Shabbat should be adopted as a societal practice. And she basically asks the same question of, why is Shabbat or rest so important? And so just to read the answer, Rev Elijah of Vilna put it this way: God stopped to show us that what we create becomes meaningful to us only once we stop creating it and start to think about why we did it. The implication is clear. We could let the world wind us up and set us to marching like mechanical dolls that go and go until they fall over because they don't have a mechanism that allows us to pause. But that would make us less than human. We have to remember to stop because we have to stop to remember. And so just the last thing I'll say before opening it up for questions or conversation is just in this first sort of glimpse of Shabbat, both in a theological, in a philosophic, and an ethical sense, what Shabbat is truly trying to cultivate is a separation from the natural world, an acknowledgement that nature and everything that nature and physicality and materiality has to offer is great, but that's not the whole picture. And that there's things in the world, like relationships, like morals, like God, that oftentimes or can seldom be found in the physical and material world. And there actually needs to be a time once a week where we stop and appreciate those things that are not able to be found in a world full of materialism, but can only be found in a community or individual reflecting and meditating on those things. So let me stop sharing. If people have any thoughts, I'd love to hear any thoughts, questions, Marilyn, did you, I see you have your, oh, and you also have your hand raised.
No, I think that's, I don't have a question.
I have a, oh, I have a comment. So when that piece came up about Israel, I spent a month in Israel at one point, and it's a little bit easier to observe Shabbat when everybody around you is observing Shabbat. It's much more difficult here in our society, especially living where there's so few that are, I mean, there are concentrated areas of Jewish communities where they make it easier because everyone's doing it in their little realm. But here, I mean, I just wanted to point that out. I mean, it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And it definitely is a challenge. It's funny because there's, right, he's one of my favorite Jewish thinkers, but there also is a very insulting flip side. There was one of the greatest Israeli literary giants, Aleph Bet Yehoshua, just passed away last week. And he was really like, he was called like the Israeli Faulkner, like, really the writer of Israel in the last, 70, 80 years. And one of the things that he was notoriously famous for, right? He wrote a lot of beautiful books. I don't want to insult him at all, but one of the things that he constantly said was that Jews in the diaspora aren't living real Jewish lives. And he wasn't talking about Reformed, he was talking about the whole gamut. Anything from ultra-Orthodox to secular in America, they're not real Jews because Judaism is not in the public sphere and Judaism is not in control of the politics. And so he wrote a very famous essay, and I'll tell you why I don't agree with him in a second. So but it's an interesting argument to hear out. He wrote a famous essay where he compared Judaism in America to the spice box or the besamim box that we bring out during Havdalah, which is every once in a while or once a week when we want something nice, we go to our cabinet, open it up, take that nice smell, and then put it back for next week. And he's like, well, when you're in America, that's basically what Judaism is, as opposed to Israel, where it's everywhere. I think the opposite, the flip side of the equation where he gets that wrong is in America, you actually have to be self-motivated, right? And one of the things that you hear from a lot of Israelis is either they want nothing to do with Judaism because they view it as basically a state coercive tool, right? There's a whole bunch of debates about public transit or stores open on Shabbat in Israel, but also oftentimes when you're living, when something's taken for granted, when it's obvious that society is shut down on Shabbat, or when it's obvious that there's kosher food everywhere, or whatever those things are, there actually is there's no real struggle there. And a lot of people don't even realize that Judaism requires, or really any commitment requires some sacrifice. So I think that there's a little bit of both, whereas like, it's funny because your average, more secular Israeli doesn't, right? They obviously know about Shabbat because it's on the calendar in Israel, but I don't know if they have the same appreciation. A lot of times there's a really interesting phenomenon where Israelis will come to the diaspora and it'll be the first time in their life they actually start to celebrate Jewish holidays and Shabbat, precisely because it's not taken for granted. And so yes, I definitely identify with that. And I think also there's the interesting flip side. I'm going to officially stop the live stream. I'm happy to, again, hang out here. I just don't want to endlessly be streaming onto Facebook. I don't know if we pay per minute.
Daniel, Cindy wanted me to say something that I was talking about with her while this was going on. And I hope I'll get the crux of what I said to her. I'm not sure what she wanted me to say, but I was thinking about Shabbat. This was at the beginning, and it was all the things that you do not create. God stopped creating. You shouldn't create your things. And I was thinking about, well, what should we do? And part of my mind went to the years of Torah study I had of much of what Torah says, and then it boiled down to that saying, Hillel says,
I think it was Hillel who said, don't do to your neighbor as you wouldn't do, and now the rest is study, right? So, part of that philosophical idea of what Torah really means. And since we're created in the image of God, what came to me at that point was that I should try to be godly on Shabbat. So what should I be on Shabbat? I should be pulled toward God. And what does that mean? I should have studied the Torah, which said I should be kind to the people around me. So really, Shabbat should be a time that I should be looking for the things that God didn't create, that we didn't see in that physical sense. And what would those be? It would be like, creating relationships is what it would come down to. I should create something on Shabbat. Okay, so it said I can't create certain things, but I was thinking, I should really create it, especially since like on Saturday, or was it Saturday we spent with Nico? And it was the nicest few hours with Nico and his family, and we created this beautiful thing between us and the Sokolovsky family as they were leaving, and so we did